The first snow of November fell over southern Colorado like a soft warning. The flakes spinning in the headlight beams along U.S. Route 160 and sticking to the dark shoulder of Wolf Creek Pass, pines climbed the mountains like a black ocean frozen in place. The sky was a cold sheet of iron. Somewhere far off, a train wailed through the San Luis Valley, one lonely note in a world that didn't know Cassidy Quinn's name. She sat in the passenger seat of her father's pickup, breathing into cupped hands that smelled faintly of gasoline. The heater rattled like an old man clearing his throat, failing to push real warmth into the cracked leather cab. Moisture bloomed on the glass. Her father drove with his jaw clenched and his hat pulled low, a cigarette trapped between two fingers that trembled only. When they passed a state trooper in the opposite lane, "You'll keep your mouth shut," he said at last, without looking at her. "Let me do the talking." Cassidy stared at the ribbon of blacktop shouldering up the mountain. "What am I supposed to say?" "You're not supposed to say anything." Her throat tightened. She watched her reflection wobble in the window, a thin face pale under the truck's jaundiced dome light. Hair she'd cut herself in the bathroom mirror. A white line of an old scar slanting through her left eyebrow like a misplaced comma. She was 22 and looked forever caught between 17 and a long winter. Men's eyes slid past her like she was a smudge on glass. The word that hung over her in high school ugly stuck to the inside of her skull like frost. They turned onto a forest road where the snow lay thicker, the world muffled by it. The tires crunched. Pines leaned in, heavy with white. At the end of the road, a wrought iron gate stood open between stone pillars, light spilling out beyond like the throat of a hearth. A house rose from a curve in the land, a lodge of timber and glass with a roof pitched against a century of storms. It looked like it had been built by hands that understood the mountain's language. Cassidy's father killed the engine. The sudden silence felt like falling through ice. "Remember," he said, flicking ash into an empty coffee cup. "You don't speak unless he asks you a question. Who is he?" A muscle jumped in her father's cheek. "A man with the power to make our troubles go away." "By buying me," she said before she could swallow the words. His gaze snapped to her, watery and sharp all at once. "You think there's a line of princes out there for you, Cass? You think you get to choose?" She flinched. He sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and reached for the door handle. The cold hit them as soon as they stepped out, clean, metallic, alive. Snow whispered against her boots. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a shape moved low and silent. The hair rose along her arms beneath the thrift store coat. Two men stepped out of the lodge. Their shoulders were wide under dark wool, their eyes steady in a way that made Cassidy think of bones, old and sure. One had a scar like a pail slashed down his neck. The other wore a watch that glowed faintly under the porch lights. "Mr. Quinn?" The one with the watch asked. His voice was even like a river in winter. "That's me," her father said, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. "We spoke on the phone." The men nodded once, stepping aside. "He's expecting you." Inside, the lodge smelled like cedar and smoke, like the breath of something enormous and gentle at once. Heat bloomed from a stone fireplace that climbed the wall like a cathedral. A woven Navajo rug grounded the open room. Antlers arched overshadowed doorways. A grand piano, closed, slept under a window hung with the blue bruise of the night. Footsteps approached, quiet, deliberate. Cassidy looked up and met eyes the color of old whiskey. The man who crossed the room toward them moved like someone who never needed to hurry to arrive first. He wore a charcoal sweater and dark jeans. There was a line of silver at his temple, not enough to age him, just enough to sharpen him. Everything about him carried a gravity that pressed on the skin in a way Cassidy couldn't name. "Mr. Quinn," he said. His voice was low, shaped by mountains. "I'm Asher Hawley." Her father stuck out his hand too fast. "Pleasure, sir." "This is my daughter, Cassidy." Hale's gaze shifted to her. Not a flicker of surprise at her plain face, not a wince at the scar. Not the quick calculation she knew from other men. What can she offer me? He didn't look through her. He looked at her like a surveyor learning the lay of land he respected by instinct. A warmth lit in her chest she didn't trust. "Cassidy," Asher Hall said, and there was something in the way he said her name, careful and exact, that made it sound like an answer. She lifted her chin. Mr. Hawley, would you like some tea? He asked. He wasn't looking at her father anymore. He was asking her. Her father gave a little laugh. She's not picky. I asked her. Asher didn't raise his voice, but the air seemed to listen differently. Cassidy's throat felt tight again, but not from fear this time. Tea would be nice, she said softly. He gestured toward the fire. Please sit. One of the men disappeared and returned with a tray, a porcelain pot painted with cranes, a bowl of sliced lemon, honey, and a small glass jar. Cassidy cupped the mug, the heat soaking into her fingers until the ache of the truck lifted. Snow tapped at the tall panes of glass like a polite ghost. Let's talk plainly, Asher said, turning to her father. You owe $56,000. Her father's smile frayed. A little more than that with interest. You sold the same machines twice, Asher continued, almost conversational. To men who don't have your patience or your humor. I had a rough season. I know the men you owe, Asher said. They want your blood for sport, but they'll accept money on principle. Which is why I came to you, her father said quickly, relief blooming like sweat. You're, a man who understands arrangements. The word hung there, arrangements, damp and ugly in Cassidy's lungs. Asher's eyes didn't leave her father's. Here's my arrangement. I settle the debt. Your daughter stays here under my protection for 1 year. She is free to leave at any time, and when she does, you will not contact her again. Silence fell in the room like heavy snow. Cassidy felt something tip inside her body, a slow slide toward a cliff. Her father blinked. 1 year? That wasn't what we discussed. It is what I'm offering, Asher said. And unlike the men who are waiting for you at the Copper Lantern right now, I won't break your hands to make the point. Her father's face went white in a way Cassidy had seen once when he found a copperhead coiled under the porch steps. He tried on a smile that didn't fit. She's my daughter. You sold the idea of your daughter on a burner phone at a truck stop, Asher said mildly. But the person you brought is not a commodity. She is a guest in my home if she chooses to be. Her heart pounded so loud she could feel it in her teeth. Choose. The word sounded like a door she'd never been allowed to open. Her father had brought her here to be traded for his debt. Asher Hawley had changed the math. I won't sign nothing unless I know what you expect, her father said, suddenly tough again, like a cornered cat arching up. What happens to her here? Asher turned to Cassidy then, fully, and for a second the world narrowed to the distance between his gaze and her breath. She eats. She sleeps. She is not afraid. She walks the land if she wants it. She learns what the mountain can teach. She is treated with respect. If she wants work, I'll give her meaningful work. If she wants silence, I have acres of it. Her father laughed once, ugly. You ain't touched on the part everyone's thinking. A shadow crossed Asher's eyes. I don't force what isn't given. And I don't take what isn't offered. The room breathed again, or maybe that was just Cassidy remembering how. Excuse me, Asher said, as if remembering a courtesy. He crossed to a cabinet and took out a folder. He pulled a sheet free, slid it across the table with a pen. The paper looked simple. It felt like stone. What's that? Her father asked. An agreement, Asher said. I pay what you owe and you sign that you will not contact Cassidy for the duration of her stay or after. If you do, the debt returns to you with interest. If she chooses to leave tonight, I still pay your debt and you still never contact her again. That's not hell, that's not fair. It's generous. Asher's voice didn't move. And it is final. The fire popped. Outside, the snow thickened, a white hush rising against the glass. Cassidy's hands trembled around the mug. She could smell the lemon and the black tea and something else, the faintest scent of wild animal, clean and dry like sun-warmed fur after a storm. It was gone in a breath. Her father stared at the paper as if it were a cliff he couldn't climb. He looked at Cassidy. For a moment, his face softened with something she wanted to call love and didn't trust enough to name. You think you're better off with him? He asked. There was a pleading in it she hadn't expected. She met his eyes. She thought of the nights she'd hidden in the pantry while men slurred her name and laughed in her father's kitchen. The mornings she'd walked to the store alone before sunrise, a hood pulled low. The way a town can hold some girls tender and grind other girls into gravel. She thought of a mountain that didn't flinch at weather, and a man who'd said her name like he was learning it. Not buying it, I think, she said, her voice steadying. I'd like to decide for myself. Asher's gaze cut to her. Not with approval, not with surprise, something quieter. A kind of relief. Her father swallowed, nodded, and scratched his name where the line waited. Asher countersigned with a swift motion. One of the men scarred down the neck took a photo of the signatures with a phone that looked ordinary and didn't feel it. It's done, Asher said. Her father stood, strangely small in the long room. He lifted a hand, let it fall. You be good, Cass. She almost laughed at that, at the way some men crown women with good only when they're leaving them behind. Drive safe, she said instead, because the snow was slick and something in her refused to let bitterness be the last thing spoken. He hesitated. The front door opened and cold folded into the warm. Then he was gone, swallowed by the weather and the road he'd chosen. For a moment after the door closed, Cassidy couldn't move. The room felt too large for her bones. The silence was full but not empty. Like the hush in a cathedral after the last hymn. You can have the north bedroom, Asher said gently, as if asking a frightened animal to take water. It looks into the pines. Extra blankets in the cedar chest. If you need anything, knock once on the hall and someone will help. If you'd like to call someone to tell them you're safe, I can have a phone brought that won't be traced to your father. I don't have anyone to call, Cassidy said, surprising herself with how light the words felt when she finally set them down. Asher nodded, something like understanding moving across his face. He poured another cup of tea and set it near her elbow. There's stew in the kitchen. You look like you haven't eaten properly in a while. Heat touched her cheeks. I'm fine. No one who says they're fine at night is fine, he said, but there was no bite in it. He turned toward the window. The snow had deepened into a veil. The mountain's breath felt closer to the glass. I have questions, she said. I figured. Why me? He considered this like a craftsman considers a knot in good wood. Because you were brought to my door, he said at last. Because your eyes looked at a room full of weapons and saw the piano first. Because the men who wanted your father's debt look at people like hunger looks at meat. And I can't stand hunger only being fed. You don't even know me. I know enough. She waited. He didn't offer more. Something in her unwound like a fist unclenching. He wasn't going to sweeten it or poison it. He was simply going to do what he said. A low sound thrummed through the night, then so low she felt it more than heard it. A long, unbroken note like the mountain humming. Cassidy's skin prickled. The men in the room stilled, their faces tipped slightly toward the dark glass the way wild creatures test the air. Asher's head lifted. The line of his body changed, something coiled and sure waking under the gentleman's skin. Excuse me, he said. He moved toward the door with the fluid quiet of a thing built to run in snow. What was that? Cassidy asked, rising without meaning to. He paused with his hand on the latch. The fire painted his cheek in copper. For the first time, a smile touched his mouth, small, private, at an angle. The land, he said, but the word sounded like a promise with fur on it. And what lives on it? The door opened. The cold stepped in like a tall guest. Asher vanished into the night. Cassidy stood alone in the long room, the tea cooling in her hands, the fire casting her shadow enormous across the rug. She walked to the window. Snow feathered down, thick and quiet. Between the pines, a shape moved low, powerful, graceful. Another answered from deeper in the trees, the sound a ribbon pulled through the night. She pressed her palm to the glass. Her breath fogged it with a small, fleeting cloud. A white flare burned against the dark eyes, catching a line of light. The shape paused, turned, and for a heartbeat the whole world seemed to hinge on the space between her and that gaze. She should have been afraid. Instead, her chest loosened, the way a locked door gives under a key. Boots scuffed behind her. She startled and spun, guilt blooming ridiculous and immediate in her ribs. Miss Quinn, said the man with the scar at his neck. If you're hungry. Ah, yes. Thank you. He led her down a hall lined with framed maps, edges softened by time and oil. The kitchen was warm and alive, copper pots hanging like suns, a pot of elk stew steaming on the stove. He set a bowl in front of her, a heel of bread, butter in a small crock. Cassidy didn't realize she was shaking until the spoon clinked against the ceramic. "I'm Eli," he said, because men close to kings sometimes introduce themselves to calm the room. "I keep the place running." "Cassidy," she said. "I know," he said gently. "He's not what people say." She didn't ask who he meant. She blew on the spoon and tasted heat and time and a meat that felt like strength borrowed from a creature that could survive January. Something in her steadied. Eli leaned his hip against the counter, eyes on the window above the sink where snow wrote hush on the world. "There's an old story here," he said. "The mountain chose a family to keep it. They kept the mountain and the mountain kept them. The town calls it all kinds of names. But the ones who live long out here, well, they know the difference between shadows and guardians." "And Asher?" "He listens when the wind talks," Eli said. "So the wind does him favors." When she finished eating, he set a tin of salve beside her bowl. "For your hands. The cold here is honest. It will crack what's dry if you don't tend it." "Thank you." She rubbed a little into her knuckles. It smelled like spruce and honey. Upstairs, the north bedroom held her with a gentleness that made her want to cry. She opened the window a fingertip to let the cold in. The pine smell was sharp and clean. She slid between sheets warmed by thick quilts and listened to the house breathe, wood settling, snow shifting, a low sound at the edge of hearing like a song sung to stone. Sleep came in stitching, careful and slow. In the last thin seam before dreams took her, she felt it again, the sense of being watched. Not by hunger, but by something old and protective. Something that had circled this lodge long before she arrived and would circle it long after she left. Unless she stayed. In her dream, a wolf stood at the tree line and bowed its head, not in threat but in recognition. When it lifted its gaze, the eyes were whiskey brown and patient. A man's silhouette threaded into its outline and back again, like water choosing its form. She woke once in the deep hours and found the room silvered by moonlight, the window traced with ferns of ice. She pressed her fingertips to the glass until the ice melted into tiny teardrops that slid and disappeared. Down in the black between pines, something moved, a steady circuit. A watch kept. And for the first time she could remember. Cassidy Quinn fell back to sleep with a quiet that felt like being held without hands. Morning would bring questions. The mountain would bring answers on its own terms. Her father's world had sold her and counted it as profit. Asher Hall had bought her time and called it a choice. Between those two ledgers, a new arithmetic waited, written in paw prints and promises. Outside, the night wore the snow like a crown. Inside, a woman who had never been anyone's treasure closed her eyes in a king's house and began to believe, barely, stubbornly, that the word ugly might finally thaw into something else. Something like worthy. Something like queen. The first morning in Asher Hale's house smelled of cedar smoke, coffee, and something wild beneath it, a scent Cassidy couldn't name but felt in her blood like a pulse. She woke before dawn, wrapped in heavy quilts that carried the warmth of bodies and fire. Frost webbed the window panes, glittering like spun glass. Beyond it, the pines stood black against a sky bruised blue-gray, and the snow reflected the first pale light of day. For a long time she lay still, trying to remember what was real. Her father's truck, the firelit lodge, the papers signed on the table. Asher's voice saying, "You are not afraid." It all seemed like something she had dreamt on the road, except the room was real. The silk of the sheets, the low hum of heat moving through old pipes. She rose. Pulling on a flannel shirt she found folded at the foot of the bed. It was too large, soft, worn at the collar. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and Asher's cologne. Downstairs, the house was already awake. Eli, the scarred man, was stacking wood by the fireplace. He nodded at her, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Morning, Miss Quinn. Coffee's fresh." "Thank you," she said, her voice rough from sleep. He poured her a cup, the steam curling like breath. "He's outside. Always goes walking before sunrise." "In this cold?" Eli's smile deepened just a fraction. "The cold doesn't bother him." Cassidy sipped the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. The mug was heavy in her hands, handmade, glazed in deep green. Everything in this house seemed built to last. She found herself drifting toward the tall windows overlooking the yard. Snow blanketed the ground, but she could see tracks large, distinct, too wide for a dog. They circled the house, then disappeared into the trees. Wolves? She asked quietly. Eli's pause was short, but telling. We've always had them in these hills. Do they ever come close? He set another log on the fire. Only when they mean to. Cassidy turned back to the window. Far at the edge of the trees, movement caught her eye, something dark and fluid sliding through the snow. Then, for a heartbeat, a shape stood clear against the light. A wolf. Massive, coat the color of ash and shadow. Eyes glinting amber in the dawn. She froze. Coffee forgotten, breath catching in her throat. The creature looked directly at her. Not the casual glance of an animal, but the long, deliberate stare of something that knew. And then it was gone, swallowed by the forest. A minute later, the back door opened. Asher stepped inside, brushing snow from his hair. He wore a heavy coat unzipped at the throat, his breath visible in the cold air. His eyes, those same amber-brown eyes, found hers instantly. "You're awake early," he said, voice low and even. "I couldn't sleep." He nodded toward the mug in her hand. "Eli keeps it strong. It'll chase the ghosts off." She managed a small smile. "I think they're already awake." He looked at her a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "Did you see it?" "The wolf," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly. "Describe it." "Gray, big, it was watching the house." "Was it afraid?" "No." He smiled faintly. "Then it wasn't hunting. You're not surprised?" "No," he said. "Nothing out there moves without my knowing." Something in his tone made her shiver, not in fear, but in the strange recognition of power that was not cruel, just absolute. He shrugged off his coat, the motion smooth and unhurried. Beneath it, a flannel shirt stretched across broad shoulders. His skin was flushed from the cold, steam rising faintly from where the warmth of the house met him. "You should eat," he said. "It's a long day." "For what?" "For learning," he said. "If you're staying, you need to understand the mountain. It doesn't tolerate guests who only look at it from windows." Eli reappeared, handing Cassidy a pair of worn boots lined with fur. "You'll need these." Outside, the snow was clean and untouched except for the wolf tracks. The air stung her cheeks, sharp and pure. Asher walked ahead, silent, his steps sure. He didn't seem to leave footprints for long. The snow fell back into place behind him, erasing his path almost instantly. Cassidy followed, breath puffing in small clouds. "Do you live here alone?" "As much as anyone lives alone," he said. "Eli, some others who keep the land. The rest come and go." "The wolves?" His mouth curved. "Them too." They reached the tree line where the world went quiet, no wind, no birds, only the soft sound of snow giving way underfoot. "Tell me something, Cassidy," he said suddenly, turning to face her. "Do you believe in stories?" She hesitated. "You mean fairy tales?" "I mean the kind that get told because they're true in ways people forget how to measure." She thought of her father, of the men who laughed at her face and her silence, of how every story she'd known had ended the same way. The beautiful saved, the broken left behind. "No," she said. "I stopped believing in stories a long time ago." Asher studied her, eyes catching light through the trees. "Then maybe it's time you start again." They walked until the lodge was just a shadow through the pines. Asher stopped near a fallen tree, its bark stripped clean. He crouched, brushing snow away to reveal deep claw marks gouged into the wood. "Mountain cats?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, this was done in warning." "By what?" He straightened slowly. "By something that doesn't like trespassers." "Then why bring me here?" "Because," he said quietly, "sometimes the mountain chooses its own." Before she could reply, a howl echoed across the ridge low, rising close enough to vibrate through her chest. She turned, heart hammering, scanning the trees. Asher didn't move. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "That one's mine." And then she saw it, the same gray wolf stepping from between the pines, snow swirling around it. It came closer, eyes locked on Asher, head bowed low. Not submission, recognition. The wolf brushed against him once, a silent greeting before turning its gaze on her. Cassidy's breath caught Dot. It came close enough that she could see the frost clinging to its fur, the intelligence in its eyes. And then, before her eyes, It stepped back into shadow, its form blurring, twisting, shifting until there was nothing there but the echo of movement and the faint scent of smoke and pine. When she looked again, Asher stood alone. Her voice broke the silence. "What are you?" He smiled, slow and quiet. "A man who keeps promises to old gods." "You changed." He looked down at his hands as though remembering them. "You saw the truth most never live long enough to see." She took a step back. "You're a—" "Yes," he said simply. "A Wolf, Alpha, if the word makes sense to you. Protector of this place, bound to it. That's what your father sold you into." Her mind reeled, trying to hold the shape of what she'd seen. "Then why didn't you hurt me?" "Because," he said, and his voice softened, "you didn't look at me with fear. You looked at me like someone who's been hunted her whole life and still stood her ground." He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near her face but not touching. "You deserve a world that doesn't feed on your fear. I can give you that." Cassidy swallowed hard. "What if I don't believe any of this?" He smiled faintly. "Belief isn't required. Only choice." The wind rose through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of another howl, higher, unfamiliar. Asher's expression shifted. "We should go. What was that?" "Not one of mine." They hurried back toward the house, snow falling heavier now. The warmth of the lodge hit like safety, but the unease followed them in. Eli met them at the door, face tight. "Asher, the northern ridge. Tracks fresh, big." Asher's jaw clenched. "They're testing the boundary." "Who?" Cassidy asked. He looked at her, eyes now golden in the firelight. "A rival pack. A rival pack. They don't respect the old laws." He turned to Eli. "Prepare the lines. Tonight we patrol." Eli nodded and vanished down the hall. Cassidy stood frozen. "You're going to fight them?" "If I have to," Asher said. "But they'll learn what it means to trespass on my land." He took her hand, his grip warm, grounding. "Stay inside. No matter what you hear." Her voice trembled. "And if they come here?" He looked at her then with an intensity that made her heart ache. "Then they'll learn why even monsters kneel before queens." Asher released her hand and disappeared into the night once more. The snow fell heavier, the world outside a blur of white and shadow. From deep in the forest came the sound of wolves, many angry, echoing through the dark. And beneath it, softer but stronger, a single answering howl that made the windows shiver. Cassidy stood by the fire, the warmth painting her face gold. She didn't know what this new world was or why it had chosen her. But as the mountain roared around her, she realized something fierce and quiet inside her had awakened. Too, the girl who had been sold like a debt was gone, and somewhere in the storm, a Wolf fought for her name. The night shook with howls. They rolled down from the ridge and across the frozen pines like thunder with a heartbeat. Like something ancient remembering its hunger, Cassidy sat by the fire, wrapped in one of the thick wool blankets from the cedar chest, watching the door as if it might breathe. The house felt alive, the walls seemed to tremble slightly, as if the mountain itself was leaning closer to listen. Eli came in from the hall, carrying a shotgun that looked older than both of them. His scar caught the firelight. "You should go to the cellar," he said. "Stone walls. You won't hear the worst of it." "I'm not hiding," she said quietly. He studied her for a long second, then nodded. "You've got the mountain in you already." She didn't know what he meant, but she felt it, that strange, pulsing awareness that had been waking inside her since the moment Asher's world touched hers. Every sound seemed sharper, every scent clearer. The smoke, the snow, the metallic tang of cold air leaking in around, the window frames. She could feel him out there. Asher, his presence like a heartbeat. Under the skin of the forest, through the tall glass. The night flashed with movement shapes darting between trees, quick and low. Shadows meeting shadows. Growls broke against the wind, deep and guttural. Then the sharp cry of impact, bodies colliding. Eli stood near the window, watching. "They're testing him," he said. "They want his claim." "Claim on what?" "The mountain. The valley. Everything that breathes here. And me." She asked before she could stop herself. Eli looked at her, eyes unreadable. "You're part of it now." A crash came from the far woods, timber splitting under force. Then a howl, long and defiant. Hers, no, his. The sound ran straight through her. Hot and electric, a note that seemed to pull her heart toward the window. She took a step closer, but Eli caught her arm. "You don't go out there," he said firmly. "He'd never forgive me if I let you." She nodded, though the pull inside her didn't fade. It burned. Minutes passed, an eternity measured in silence and distant snarls. Then the forest went still again. Eli lowered the shotgun slightly. "It's done. How can you tell?" He tilted his head. "Because the mountain's breathing again." The door opened then, and the knight walked in. Asher filled the doorway. Blood streaked across his forearm, eyes still golden in the firelight. Steam rose from his skin. He looked less like a man and more like the space between one heartbeat and the next. Creature balanced perfectly between power and control. Eli moved forward instantly. "You're hurt." "Not badly," Asher said. "They're gone." His voice was rough, threaded with something wild that hadn't yet settled back into words. Cassidy stood. "What happened?" "They sent a messenger," he said. "One of theirs. Wanted me to yield the northern ridge." "Did you?" He looked at her then, and there was a strange, soft danger in his smile. "No," he crossed the room to the fire, the scent of snow and blood following him. When he reached for a towel, Cassidy moved first, grabbing one from the table. Without thinking, she stepped close, pressing the cloth against the cut on his arm. He tensed under her touch, every muscle coiled, but he didn't pull away. His skin was hot, the heat of a body not entirely human. "You shouldn't touch me like this," he said, voice low. "Why not?" "Because I don't trust myself not to touch you back." The room seemed to tilt, every sound fading except the crack of the fire and the rhythm of their breathing. Cassidy swallowed, forcing herself to keep her hand steady. "You're bleeding." He looked down at her, eyes dark now, the gold fading back to brown. "Not anymore." Their gazes held. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, wind rising. One step from flight or fall. Eli cleared his throat softly from the corner. "I'll check the perimeter." He left them alone. Cassidy dropped the towel into the basin, her hands trembling. "You said they sent a messenger. What did he want?" Asher's voice softened. "We said a storm's coming. Bigger than any pack fight." "Do you believe him?" "I believe the air smells like change." He moved toward the window, staring out at the snow. "There are old laws that keep the peace between my kind and yours. Someone's breaking them. I don't know why yet, but I'll find out." She hesitated. "And me, what happens to me in all this?" He turned back to her. "You learn. You listen. You stay alive. I'm not good at staying out of trouble." He smiled faintly. "I noticed." She crossed her arms. "You think you can protect me from all of this?" "No," he said simply. "I think I can protect you from everything except me." Her heart stumbled. "Then what are you protecting me for?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden charm shaped like a crescent moon. He pressed it into her palm, his fingers closing gently around hers. "It's carved from the heart of this mountain," he said. "As long as you wear it, you belong to no one's command but your own." Cassidy stared at it, the smooth wood warm from his touch. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The ones who'll come next won't knock on the door." That night she couldn't sleep. The wind whispered against the glass like a voice trying to form words. She got up, wrapped in a blanket, and went to the balcony outside her room. The moon hung heavy and white, silvering the snow. Somewhere below, a wolf howled low, steady, almost mournful. Another answered, closer this time. And though she couldn't see him, she knew Asher was out there, watching the same sky. She touched the charm at her throat and whispered, "Be careful!" The wind carried the words away. But a moment later, a second howl rose deeper, stronger. A reply. For the first time, she smiled. The next morning, the world was bright and cold, the snow glittering like glass. Eli was gone, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the fire. Cassidy wandered through the hallways, drawn toward the sound of a piano's soft, deliberate notes echoing down the corridor. She followed it to a large room lined with books and light. Asher sat at the piano, barefooted, his hands moving slowly across the keys. The music was something old, aching, full of shadows and snow like dot, She stood in the doorway, silent. He didn't look up. You should rest. I couldn't. I know. She stepped closer, the floor cold beneath her feet. What are you playing? A song my mother used to hum, he said. Before she turned. Turned? He nodded. She was human once. Most of us were. It happens differently for each of us. For me, it was the night I killed the man who murdered her. Her breath caught. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said softly. The mountain chooses its wolves the same way fire chooses wood. It takes what will burn the brightest. He looked at her then, his voice low. And sometimes it chooses queens. Her heart stuttered. Queens? Not the kind that wear crowns, he said. The kind that change the way even monsters breathe. Before she could speak, the sound of engines shattered the quiet. A convoy of trucks pulling up the long drive tires crunching over snow. Asher stood instantly. Stay here. Cassidy's pulse spiked. Who is it? He went to the window. His expression darkened. Hunters? Hunters? Men who kill what they fear. He turned to her, eyes bright again, half wolf, half man. They think this place belongs to them. She took a step forward. Then let me stand with you. He looked at her, a thousand things in his gaze, warning, disbelief, pride. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do, she said. You saved me once. Let me save something now. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he nodded slowly. Then stay close. And when I tell you to run, you don't. Outside, the truck stopped. Men in heavy coats climbed out, rifles slung, eyes scanning the woods. The war between wolves and men had begun. And somewhere deep in the mountain, the wind whispered her name like a secret finally spoken. Queen, the first shot cracked the air like a branch. Breaking under ice, Cassidy dropped to the floor as glass shattered across the piano room. The sound was a storm in her ears, men shouting outside, the sharp bark of gunfire echoing off the frozen pines. Smoke drifted through the broken windows, carrying the metallic sting of gun oil and snow. Asher was already moving. 1 second he was beside her, the next he was a blur of motion, eyes burning gold, muscles coiled. Stay behind me, he said, voice roughened, half human. What do they want? She asked, breath shaking. The same thing every hunter wants, he said. Proof that monsters bleed. He turned toward the door, jaw tight, every line of him alive with controlled fury. Aye, on the east wall, came the reply from somewhere beyond the hall, followed by the crack of another gunshot. Cassidy's heart pounded so loud it drowned the wind. She crawled toward the side wall, glass crunching under her hands. Through the window she saw them, 5, maybe 6 men dressed in heavy winter coats, faces hidden under scarves. They moved like predators, quick and sure, rifles gleaming under the pale sun. One of them was shouting orders. His voice carried through the cold. Bring him out! Hale's time is done. She didn't know who they were, but the words made something in her chest twist. Hale's time is done. Asher stepped closer to the door, every inch of him burning with stillness. Then he turned to her. If I fall, don't say that. You run for the ridge. Follow the river. Don't look back! I'm not leaving you. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. Queens don't take orders. Remember that. Then he was gone out the door, into the storm. Cassidy pressed herself against the wall, shaking. The gunfire roared again, short bursts followed by silence. Then another burst. It was impossible to tell who was winning. Only that the world outside had turned into chaos. She crawled toward the window, peering through the smoke. She saw shapes moving fast, too fast to be human. Wolves, massive and silver gray, darting between the trees, taking down men before they could reload. The snow was streaked with red dot, and in the middle of it all Asher. He moved like something elemental. Half man, half beast, fury and grace woven together. Bullets tore through his coat. He didn't stop. His roar filled the forest, low and terrible, shaking snow from the branches. Cassidy's throat closed. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. This was not cruelty. It was protection in its rawest form. Then, through the smoke, she saw one of the hunters break away, circling toward the back of the house. He was carrying something metal glinting faintly in his hands. A grenade. Cassidy's stomach dropped. No. She bolted from her hiding place, running through the hall. The world seemed to slow, each step echoing too loud. She reached the back door just as the man pulled the pin. "Hey," she shouted. He turned, startled. Cassidy threw the nearest thing, a heavy iron candlestick. It hit him square in the shoulder. The grenade fell, rolling into the snow. For a second, both of them froze, staring. Then Asher was there. He tackled her hard, throwing both of them to the ground as the explosion ripped through the air. The sound was a sunburst light, fire, snow turning to steam. When she opened her eyes, the world was ringing. Smoke drifted over the shattered porch. Asher's body was half over hers, shielding her from the blast. His coat was torn, blood blooming across his side. "You're hurt," she said, voice breaking. He pushed up on one arm, breath ragged. "Not badly." She stared at the blood. "You're lying." He almost smiled. "You're learning." From the woods came the sound of retreating engines. Eli appeared at the corner of the house, limping, rifle still in hand. "They're running." "North Ridge." Asher exhaled, the light in his eyes dimming back toward human. "Let them. They've learned enough for tonight." He tried to stand and stumbled. Cassidy caught him, her hands pressing against his side. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "Let me help you," she said. "You already did." They moved slowly back inside. The house smelled of smoke and cedar. The fire had gone out, leaving only embers glowing like distant eyes. Eli joined them, wiping blood from his brow. They knew where to hit. Someone talked. "I know," Asher said. His voice was quiet but lethal. "And I'll find out who." Cassidy guided him to the sofa, forcing him to sit. His shirt was soaked through. She tore a strip from the curtain and pressed it against the wound. He winced. "You're braver than you look." "I'm not brave," she said. "I'm terrified." "Same thing," he murmured. She met his gaze, her heart trembling. "You could have let me die." He shook his head slowly. "You're the reason I'm still human." The words hit harder than the explosion. She felt them settle somewhere deep, warm, and dangerous. Eli returned with a bowl of hot water and bandages. "The others are checking the woods. We'll know by dawn if they're gone." Asher nodded. "They won't give up. Not after tonight." Cassidy wrung out a cloth, cleaning the blood from his side. "Then what happens next?" He watched her hands, slow and steady despite their shaking. "Next, we remind them whose mountain this is." Her breath caught. "You mean fight them again?" "If they come back, yes. And if they don't?" "Then we build something worth defending." Their eyes met, the silence stretching between them like a vow. Later, when the house had gone quiet again, Cassidy sat by the fire watching the storm ease outside. Asher slept on the sofa, his face softened by exhaustion. In the dim light, the harsh lines of him had gentled. He looked almost peaceful. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You called me queen," she whispered. "But maybe you're the one who needs saving." He stirred, eyes half open, voice rough. "You already did." She froze, thinking he was asleep, but his hand reached for hers, finding it in the dark. His skin was warm, steady. Outside, the storm finally broke. The snow fell slower now, soft and silver in the moonlight. Cassidy looked at their joined hands, at the faint rise and fall of his chest, and knew that something inside her had changed forever. The world no longer saw her as beautiful. But this man, the Wolf, had seen her as something stronger than beauty. And when morning came, she would wear that truth like armor, because she was no longer just a girl sold to a monster. She was the heartbeat of his kingdom, and the mountain had chosen its queen. The snow had not stopped falling for 3 days. It blanketed the valley like silence made visible, muting the world until the only sounds were wind, breath, and the slow shifting of the mountain itself. Cassidy woke before dawn again. The lodge was dim, lit only by embers in the hearth. The air was sharp, her breath visible as she stood. Asher still slept on the sofa, his body half wrapped in a blanket, chest rising and falling slow and deep. The wound along his ribs was nearly closed now. He healed faster than any man should. Outside, the light was blue and cold. She dressed quietly, pulling on boots and the flannel coat he'd left for her, and stepped onto the porch. The snow stretched unbroken to the line of pines. No footprints. No sound. For a moment she felt suspended between two worlds, the human one that had sold her, and the wild one that had claimed her dot, and for the first time, she didn't know which one she belonged to anymore. Behind her, the door creaked. "You shouldn't wander alone," Asher said. Voice low, warm despite the cold. Cassidy smiled faintly. "I thought wolves liked company." He stepped beside her, the boards creaking under his weight. The morning light caught in his hair, glinting faint silver. "Only certain kinds," he said. They stood in silence for a while, watching the forest breathe. Smoke curled from the chimney behind them, rising into the pale sky. "I dreamed," she said finally. He looked at her. "About what?" "About the mountain," she said. "It was burning. But underneath the fire, I could hear a heartbeat." He nodded slowly. "It's an old dream. The kind this land gives to those it chooses." "What does it mean?" "That the mountain's alive," he said. "And it's waiting for you to claim it." Her throat tightened. "I don't understand." "You will!" He turned, heading down the steps. "Come, there's something you need to see." They walked into the trees, the cold biting clean through the morning. The forest felt different now, listening, watchful. A path wound through the pines, narrow but sure. Cassidy followed it until the trees opened into a clearing she had never seen before. Dot at its center stood a stone circle dusted with snow, half buried in roots. Carvings marked the stones, wolves, moons, spirals. "What is this?" she whispered. "The heart of the mountain," Asher said. "My ancestors stood here when they took the vow to guard this land. Every alpha after them was crowned here." She turned to him. "Why bring me?" "Because I'm not the one the mountain's calling." Before she could reply, he stepped closer. His breath fogged the cold air between them. "The night your father brought you to me, I thought I was buying peace. But I was wrong. The mountain brought you here for a reason." She shook her head. "I'm not like you." His eyes glowed faintly, soft gold under the gray sky. "You're more than me. You carry the wild and the mercy both. That's rarer than any bloodline." She felt tears sting her eyes. "I don't know how to be what you think I am." "Then let it teach you." He stepped back and knelt in the snow. "Put your hand on the stone. Put your hand on the stone. Put your hand on the stone. Put your hand on the stone." "Cassidy." She hesitated, then crouched, pressing her palm against the cold surface. Dot the moment her skin met the stone. The world shifted. Wind surged through the clearing, whipping her hair across her face. The snow lifted, spiraling around them like silver dust. She gasped as warmth spread from the stone into her hand, then up her arm. A pulse that matched her heartbeat. She saw flashes, wolves running through the snow, the moon hanging huge and white above them. Asher standing where she stood now, but alone. Then she saw herself, eyes glowing faint amber, standing beside him, the mountain behind them alive with light.